This evening, the committee will be considering Bill number 180, the Miscellaneous Statutes Government Relations Transfer of Gas, Electrical, and Plumbing Functions Amendment Act 2019. We'll begin our consideration of Clause 1 short title. Minister Carr, please make your opening comments.
Great, thank you very much. I have several officials here with me tonight, and I think just as they have opportunity to speak, I'll just get them to introduce themselves at that point in time. So this bill amends 7 public and technical safety statutes to implement Cabinet's directive to consolidate gas, electrical, and plumbing licensing and inspection functions into a single point of contact with the Technical Safety Authority of Saskatchewan, TSASC. The amendments will provide the necessary legislative authority for the transfer of these functions starting in 2020. They will provide for the associated legislation and regulations to be the sole responsibility of the Ministry of Government Relations. Currently, these functions and legislative responsibilities are carried out by 3 different bodies: the Ministries of Health, Government Relations, and SaskPower. The amendments are relatively straightforward and primarily ensure that the existing terminology, authority, and definitions in the various statutes cover the transfer of functions of responsibilities to TSASC. No substantive changes are being made to licensing or inspection requirements or codes and standards contained in these statutes. The transfer of these functions will better support public safety in the province, modernize the delivery of technical safety standards, provide a single contact point for industry, and improve consistency and enforcement with TSAS's current responsibilities regarding boilers and pressure vessels, elevators, and amusement rides in the province. And I would be happy to take any questions at this point in time.
Well, thank you, Minister. Are there any questions? Mr. Witherspoon?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. How many workers in total are involved in the changes that? How many will be impacted in the changes that are occurring?
Great. Well, that's a really good question that I'm going to turn it over to my officials to answer that one so that you get the correct number.
Sure. Laurier Donné, Assistant Deputy Minister with the Ministry of Government Relations. So there is two employees from the Ministry of Government Relations from the gas and electrical licensing unit that will transfer over. And then there are also approximately 108, I think, FTEs from SaskPower's gas and electrical inspections division that would transfer over.
And what will the, thank you for the information, what will the cost of moving these regulatory functions to TSASC be?
So I guess I'll start with that one. The intent of this is to transfer services from one ministry to another ministry. So theoretically, it's transferring of assets, it's transferring of people. There should not be any additional cost because we plan on keeping the same services that we're already providing for the people of the province of Saskatchewan. They're just going to be under a different umbrella now, consolidated in, I guess, what I would like to call a one-stop shopping center for all of these kinds of trades to be able to go to. So the intent isn't to have additional costs. The intent is to just transfer services and make things run more efficiently. So I don't know if that's accurate. I imagine there will be a few small expenditures as we get started, but for the most part?
Yeah, there certainly will be some investments that will be required, on behalf of TSASC, in terms of IT systems and those kinds of things, just readying for the transfer and those upgrades. And then, we are currently incurring costs associated with a project manager on this file as well. And so, but the intent would be that, as the minister indicated, that these functions would transfer over to TSASC. They would receive the revenues associated with these functions, and then also incur the expenditures associated with that. And so, there is I think a net revenue piece from SaskPower in the neighborhood of $2 to $2.5 million. I think that would be transferring over to TSASC, and so that would sort of be utilized to pay for the expenditures associated with upfront investments and ongoing in that, so.
So the upfront, so sort of the IT system and the project manager component, the costs that you described there, those are going to be funded by SaskPower to the tune of 2.5 million. Is that correct?
No, they won't be funded by SaskPower. They'll be funded by the revenue streams, I guess, that come associated with the inspections piece. So right now, as I indicated, SaskPower's on an annual basis has net revenues of about $2 to $2.5 million, and so that's their gross revenues less their specific inspection expenses. Ends up to be the $2 to $2.5 million, and so it's that net revenue piece that will transfer over to TSASC, in order for them to pay for their upfront investments as well as future investments. There will be some transfer of unearned revenues that will go over to TSASC as well, associated with both inspections and licensing. So there will be some transfers going from the Ministry of Government Relations as well as SaskPower, to cover off sort of those responsibilities associated with revenues that they've earned to the transfer date.
So just and thanks for the information you're providing. Just to make sure I'm getting a sense here. So you've got you mentioned that there's the setup costs, an IT system, project manager you have in place. What's the total cost of the front end costs that you're incurring to take this on?
Good evening to the Chair and to the committee. My name is Bill Scott. I'm the CEO of TSASC, and we have borne some expense with respect to preparation for what is before us. It isn't the sort of thing that we've been accounting for dollar for dollar, because some of it is sort of generic changes in our business to accommodate the fact that we're going to be twice as large in the future as we are now. For instance, with respect to Saskatoon, our lease was coming due in our existing building. We took the opportunity to take a lease in another facility that was somewhat larger because that made sense, because it would then be able to accommodate the larger employee contingent, because they will be moving away from SaskPower's building. So we'll have to reflect those costs in the future. We've made some effort to change our vehicle fleet because we want to have an externalized fleet, because we don't want to administer a fleet internally, because, of course, we'll be looking at close to 100 vehicles by the time we're finished. The IT changes, everything we've done in IT, we've done with an eye to how it would reflect upon a larger TSASC. Within the recent past, we've completely updated our website. Well, our website probably needed updating in any event, but when we did so with an eye to the fact that we would be expanding our website to reflect these additional technologies and to create that portal for an external customer to be able to do all of their business in a simple fashion. So it's difficult for me to sort some of these costs one from another, because many of them would have been things that we would have done as a business in any event. But we have done these things now with a particular eye to the fact that this expansion has been now coming down the track for some time. So the big one I would reflect upon would probably be the leasehold improvements in Saskatoon, because again, there's the expectation of our near doubling in size, and some of the IT shifts. And of course, IT programs, we're not actually building something from the ground up. We're acquiring the existing system from SaskPower. We're integrating it with our system, and we're integrating it with our accounting system and our payroll system, because all of that is internalized within TSASC. So there are expenses in that regard. They are borne by TSASC, and we have operated TSASC now for a few years, knowing that this was a possibility. And we have conducted our affairs in order to ensure that we had the capacity and wherewithal to accommodate this transition if it came to pass. And now here we are. So that's the short answer.
Thank you. Can we get a number, a range on the cost then? So you've had the IT system that you've built to scale up for this capacity. You've taken on both additional space, but then done leasehold improvements on that. And there's the other costs that you've identified. There's the project manager and these pieces. What's the, to your best of your ability, how would you articulate those costs with some hard numbers?
I would suggest that with respect to the largest cost is reflected by the changes in the Saskatoon office. The IT costs, most of which are sort of generic and not specific to this expansion, but I would think we're probably in that $450,000 range.
No, mind my ignorance on this aspect here. So the workers are coming from SaskPower in Saskatoon.
From around?
Good evening, Rochelle Veray-Morphy. I'm the Vice President of Corporate and Regulatory Affairs at SaskPower. So we have inspections employees located across the province, Regina, Saskatoon primarily, but we have inspectors also located in several of our regional offices, 10 other locations besides Saskatoon and Regina. I probably couldn't name them all, but I can probably remember 2/3 of them if you want me to name them.
And so now the changes, they'll still be distributed across the province? They're not going to be in the Saskatoon office every day. They're going to continue to reside in the communities that they reside in right now. This isn't.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that as we shift forward, people that are going to be using the services of all of the services that they already use should see very little change in the way things operate from that sense. So people that are already in Estevan, for example, and I don't know if we have people in Estevan, I'm just using that as an example, they're still going to serve out of that area and they're going to live in that area. We're not going to transfer them somewhere else. So for the people that used to deal with Bob, and they're still going to call Bob, even though he's under TSASC and he used to be with SaskPower, it's still going to be their guy.
Thank you. And just as far as, so the costs to take on this change is borne by TSASC, because it's been described. Was some mention of some dollars coming from government services as well as SaskPower, or is the SaskPower mention sort of the revenue stream that they have right now? That, if you can just explain a little bit, I want to get a full understanding of who's contributing to the front end costs to prepare for this change, and then I have some questions afterwards about sort of the ongoing sort of transactional revenue line where those dollars flow in.
Right. So fair enough. I'm going to turn it over in a minute here, but first of all, I'm just going to say that as we move people over and we move our resources over, if it has to do with the inspection side of their business that's coming over to TSASC, then any resources that come with that will move over to TSASC, whether that's a person or equipment or whatever it is that they use. So that stuff will come over. And then I'm going to turn it over to, if there's any further.
Sure. Just a question, so come over, and that was to come over from government services or from SAS Power? Both. Both. Okay.
So it's not really a cost, it's just a transfer of assets, for lack of a better term.
What kind of value, what kind of assets are we talking about here? Like vehicles or?
Lorraine will.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it would be vehicles and probably computers and those types of things. Although I know some of those were sort of at the end of their life. So I think that's one of the other things that TSASC is looking at is investing in the computer technology. Just to answer your question with regards to the costs, so government relations does have the contract with the project manager, and we're paying $135 an hour on that contract. I think we originally budgeted $160,000 on that, so we're reporting on that. With regards to the revenue, the transfers that are going over. So there'll be about $500,000 in unearned revenue going from Ministry of Government Relations over to TSASC. And this is really just to cover off those licenses that we've received the funding for. But the licenses still have, a certain period of time yet, before they expire kind of thing, right? So it's really just to cover off, the expenses associated with those licenses. And then the same kind of thing on SAS Power's side. There's some unearned revenue. So it's revenue that they've received the dollars for, where there's some outstanding obligations. So maybe, inspections or some work associated with some of those permits that has yet to be done. And so that would be transferred over the date that the inspections would transfer over. And that's estimated to be around $1 million. So.
And again, if you can give me a bit more context here, who's paying that right now? Like, explain sort of that, the customer, if you will, and how they're interfacing with SAS Power. They're paying for that service right now directly to SAS Power. Is that correct? That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, as of the transfer date, there would be, a certain number of permits or so that SAS Power would have received funding for, but hadn't, discharged its obligations or its commitments, whether it's performing some inspection work or what, right? So it's really transferring those dollars associated with that additional work that needs to be done. Right?
And then after that, your relationship with SAS Power, you won't be receiving ongoing transfer from SAS Power. You will be billing, sort of having the payment direct to TSASC. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's just the one-time transfer, and then there's no more transfers that go from government or SAS Power. It would be, the revenue stream that would be, under TSASC, their ongoing license fees and inspection revenues. They would be collecting upon those and of course incurring the expenses associated with those activities.
Fees and licenses, is there is there a commitment to sort of hold the line or the approach on the cost to those fees and licenses, or is there change on that front?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so right now, we're actually not planning on changing any of the fee structure. Everything is going to stay as it is, and as TSASC moves forward, of course, it'll look at the way it's doing business and evaluate it as it goes along. But as I already mentioned, the customer should really see not a lot of change other than it doesn't come from a SAS Power address, it comes from TSASC. Services, fees will all be the same.
So the ratepayers' money has paid to help accommodate folks in the past, these employees in the past through SAS Power, and then there's been the fee for the service. I guess my question is, what's the impact on SAS Power out of this? Are we leaving space that's paid for, that's available, and leaving empty offices, or how does this all work on SAS Power's end?
So I guess just to speak to the actual employees and stuff and the way it works, so you fill out a permit, you pay the fee, and then from those fees is what actually pays for the people to go out and do the work. So it's not the utility bills that's actually paying for that, it's the fees that come in that take care of that. And so from those fees, they've managed to pay all of the expenses. And so moving forward, I think what is intended is we should have approximately $2.5 million net profit at the end of the year based on the fees that are brought in and the inspections that are done, if I'm correct.
Just a quick question. Has SAS Power utilized additional dollars in it as a corporation to establish this unit the way that it has, with things like their vehicles and their space training, or has it been fully covered and accounted for based on the fees and the licensing that occurs?
I don't know.
So within SAS Power, all of inspections activities has been fully funded by permit revenues for the last several years. So the permit revenue that we earned has covered all the expenses. You can imagine there are some services provided corporately, such as legal and HR and IT. Our finance group does charge us a notional overhead charge to help them sort of track this. Conceptually, you would expect inspections to be a nonprofit activity, but they have contributed between $2 and $2.5 million to SAS Power's general revenues over the years. Of course, whoever has inspections bears the risk of and the responsibility of doing those inspections under the Act. So I don't think it's unreasonable, but that's been the case.
And $2.5 million annually.
Yeah.
Right. So those revenues will be lost to SAS Power then at this point.
They will transfer to TSASC as part of this, but they are revenues that are earned through permit fees from contractors and homeowners that are getting electrical and gas permits. So they are intended to fund the work.
The $2.5 million is the entire revenues that flow, or $2.5 million is the profit or the earning on the.
Yeah, you could call it a profit or a surplus net. It's the net revenue minus expenses.
So SAS Power will be out the $2.5 million that it to the good that they pick up annually on that front.
Correct, yes. Of course, we're also transferring the liability and responsibility and all of those things, but yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for I mean, I always have, the concern about making sure our crowns are in a viable position, and you see a transfer of assets and a loss of that $2.5 million to the Crown as well. It's a notable concern. What's the goal? What will TSASC do with that $2.5 million profit for these services annually?
Well, I think the first thing would be that we will operate the business and we'll determine what the profit is when it's operated in our hands. It would be fully costed in our environment because we're a smaller organization. So some of the costs that perhaps aren't reflected presently would be reflected in our environment. But TSASC itself operates on a cost recovery basis. So if indeed there's a situation where an aspect of our business is overly profitable, we would adjust the fees to reflect that. We strive internally to have the technologies self-support their activity within our portfolio. So that would be our goal with respect to these additional technologies, would be to determine whether indeed they are profitable or how profitable they are, and if they are profitable to level that would not fit within our model as a not-for-profit, we would adjust the fees accordingly.
Thanks for the information around the not-for-profit mandate of TSASC. And is that mandated through legislation for TSASC?
Yeah, it is.
What can you give a ironclad your guarantee that TSASC wouldn't be privatized, wouldn't be sold?
So I guess what I would say to that is it's actually incorporated through statute and it's a nonprofit organization. So, yeah, that's how it sits.
So would you, as a minister, would you commit to ensuring that TSASC wouldn't be privatized?
Well, TSASC is an entity of its own already.
Right, but it's, I guess that entity could change through legislation, and it could be, right now it's a not-for-profit delivering a service. Legislation could change that, and it could be delivered by a business for a profit. I think this would be the entire wrong way to go, but I guess that's where I'm seeking the commitment.
Well, I think what I can say is the intent of what we're doing right now is to roll it under the umbrella of TSASC, which is in legislation, and that's what I foresee happening, and that's what's happening right now.
But you can't commit to not working towards its privatization with a commercial mandate.
I'm not going to talk about what ifs. This is what we're doing, and this is the plan, is to put it under TSASC and have it as an entity that we do right now.
I think it speaks volumes. People have their careers, and they look to guarantees through times of change. And I think that, anyways, I've asked a question a couple times, and you haven't been able to provide that commitment, which is a concern. But I'll leave that here right now. We've gone through the cost. Are there unfunded liabilities of pensions who will be transferred, or what other sort of variables are we dealing with here?
Okay, I'll just touch on it briefly, and then she'll elaborate. But our intent is that all of these employees are going to stay completely whole. What they have now is what they're going to have when they come over to TSASC. They're not going to lose anything, and they should see that moving forward as we continue on. But
So we do have some accruals associated with the employees, so accrued vacation liability, for example, and some other entitlements under their collective bargaining agreements. So for those balances, those liabilities were accrued while those employees were working at SAS Power. So after they move, the plan is that SAS Power would pay those amounts to TSAS so that they could stay true to the commitments that were incurred while they were at SAS Power.
Do you know a ballpark or a fairly good estimate? I assume we were close to this transfer as far as that cost right now.
I'm sorry, I don't, but I could probably get that for you.
That'd be great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. If through the minister to this
Sure.
table, if you can make sure the information.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Where will TSAS get the legal and this was identified, this right now legal and some of the other financial administrative services are organized through SAS Power. So how will TSAS retain those services moving forward?
yeah, I think it's fair to say that to what Bill had said earlier is once it comes into TSASC, they're going to have to do all of this stuff themselves, so it's not like they can draw on other resources. And so once they flesh all that out and see how their expenses go, then that will determine where they land on fees and all of that kind of stuff. But right now, I believe it's all intended to be done through the organization, but is there anything else to add? That's correct? Okay, so yes, all internal.
So forecasting out then, is there, I know we touched on kind of the cost of service for those that are paying for the service in the future. Is there, right now, SAS Power, you're saying, has these different efficiencies built in with its relationship with its legal team through to on the administrative side. I think through government relations, there'd be, of course, the relationship with the Ministry of Justice. That will come to an end. Is there an expectation that those costs are going to, that'll force costs to go up for those requiring inspections and fees?
Well, I believe what I heard was on the SAS Power side of things is it was cost recovery, so they did get billed from the different areas that the services that they were receiving for legal and stuff, it would get billed to their inspection department, so they actually were paying for it out of the fees that were already coming in. And I guess our piece within government was very small. There were 2 employees, so I mean, it's all relative, right?
Yeah, I just wonder if there's an efficiency to be found in that larger administrative unit or legal team, as opposed to having to go and contract or procure that independently. But you're saying right now there's not a feeling that that those costs are going to cause an increase for this service.
That's what I believe, but I think I will let someone else address that.
Most of the normal functions that you would expect to see in a corporation of our size, we have internalized. You know, we don't have a legal department. We don't have a communications department. We do have an accounting department. We do our own internal accounting. We do our own payroll. We sort of sustain ourselves in that regard. And should we require an external service, we do have relationships. But we really don't have a large dependency on any external consultancies at all. And nor do we anticipate a heavy need for those sorts of resources in the future. We're very careful about our expenditures. We try to operate responsibly on the basis that the monies that we are dealing with are our stakeholders' monies, and we treat them as in that light. We are self-supporting, and we're self-financed. So we're very careful about our expenditures.
So, thank you. Building licensing is moving to TSASC in this bill. What's happening, or what's the plan with building inspections?
That isn't part of this. They're staying exactly where they are.
Yeah,
It'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, so just to be clear, it's the gas and electrical licensing piece that is moving from that building standards and licensing. Building inspections occurs, through the municipalities and that, and so that will remain the same. We're not talking about sort of building, building permits and building inspections associated with that. So.
Okay. And I appreciated the commitment to honoring the collective agreements that are in place and honoring the employment and making sure that, whatever's been accrued from vacation through to pension obligations will be maintained. You have, I think, 3 different unions or something that represent these workers. I guess just what's the plan on the labor relations side of this, and how do you ensure that you're keeping everyone whole and those collective agreements honored? What's the plan on that moving forward?
So it's my understanding, and it was just confirmed, that as the employees come over, they'll stay within their collective bargaining agreements that they have.
And you've been working with the three different unions on this front? And have they established a plan on this front? Is that how it'll continue, or is there a plan on that front?
As they move forward, it would be those employees' choice if they decide to go to a different union, but right now, they're staying exactly where they are.
Any impact on safety with these changes? I think I think it was asserted that this may bring improved safety. Maybe I read that in your remarks or heard that, maybe not. But I guess what's the perspective? And this is critical to public safety, these functions. Failure to ensure that, that can be catastrophic. What assurances and plans do you have to make sure that safety is assured and, if anything, improved?
Well, I think I can assure you that TSASC, the way it is set up right now, has their safety record, and all of the employees that are moving over are currently fall under regulations and are safe doing the job. As they move over, they'll continue to do the same thing. And I think just like with any employer, we're always looking at ways to improve safety, and that would not change with more employees under this umbrella.
And then, of course, very important for the employees, but the function that it provides by way of public safety, it's pretty critical infrastructure that is important here. Not sure that I have, I've noted some concerns and some questions, we'll track and follow up on some of those pieces possibly at another time. I guess maybe have you of the stakeholders involved in this exercise, which would be everyone from the person paying the bill for the service and those customers through to the employees and through to SAS Power, which is impacted. Have you had concerns identified with this change with you as a minister, with your officials, and any if so, share the detail of that?
So I would say that there are no concerns. I guess the concern that is being covered here is that they were all over the map. And now with the consultations that we've been doing with the different industries, they're really happy to see the opportunity to have this call all come under one window so that it's one place to go and get your permitting and all of that stuff done. So associations are very pleased with that. They were working fine on their own, doing their own thing, but this will just, and for the customer, it's going to be much better too once everything is under one umbrella. So I don't think there are any concerns.
Has SAS Power identified any concerns through this process?
Not that I'm aware of.
And with your officials?
No, we have no concerns. We completely support this move. Inspections is a function very important to public safety, but outside of our core mandate. So,
Thanks. And the workers, sort of canvass this. I think you said I included them in my question. You haven't had concerns shared with officials or with yourself as it relates to the workers themselves, either as workers or through their unions.
Since this was announced in December 2018, I've had monthly calls with all the employees all 108 employees in the inspections division to give them an opportunity to ask questions and let them know how the transfer is going. They've had opportunities to ask questions. Bill, Scott, and I have worked together to bring them answers. We've had many discussions with the unions. And I would say good relationships, really good discussions with the unions, and we're working through it. I think the employees, there's the fear of the unknown, which isn't unexpected, but we want to make sure that this is as seamless as possible for our staff.
Thanks for the response, and I have no further questions at this time.
Are there any more questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, this bill has just under 100 clauses. Is leave granted of the committee to review this bill by parts? That is agreed. We will proceed to vote on the clauses. Part 1, short title. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 2, the Amusement Rides Safety Act. Clause 2-1. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 3, the Electrical Inspection Act, 1993. Clause 3-1 to 3-25. Is that agreed? Carried. Just a minute here. Part 4, the Electrical Licensing Act, clauses 4-1 to 4-13. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 5, the Gas Inspection Act, 1993, clauses 5-1 to 5-25. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 6, the Gas Licensing Act, clauses 6-1 to 6-14. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 7, the Passenger and Fleet Elevator Act, Clause 7-1. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 8, the Public Health Act, 1994, Clauses 8-1 to 8-3. Is that agreed? Carried. Part 9, the Technical Safety Authority of Saskatchewan Act, Clauses 9-1 to 9-4. Is that agreed? Carried.
Doing a final speech on the last day.
Yeah, I kind of did my farewell in March because I thought it was supposed to speak, but I had to figure it out some stuff.
Good. I actually would like to be there for, I hope we can figure out a way to.
Oh, you'll like the students interview?
I can imagine. I wonder for everyone's. Or something.
I think we should make an exception.
Yeah.
It's kind of big, especially when people are dancing.
We're asking for.
Just a minute here, I did.
Thank goodness.
Part 10, the Uniform Building and Accessibility Standards Act. Is that agreed?
Call the clauses 10-1.
What's that?
Call the clauses 10-1 and
Oh, yeah, sorry. Clauses 10-1 to 10-6. Is that agreed? Carried. So I'm listening to you guys talking.
Okay, I think that's what I said, nothing to see here.
Part 11, coming into force. Clause 11-1, coming into force. Is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, and acts as follows. The miscellaneous statutes, government relations, transfer of gas, electrical, and plumbing functions, Amendment Act 2019. Is that agreed? Carried. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 180, the miscellaneous statutes, government relations, transfer of gas, electrical, and plumbing functions, Amendment Act 2019, without amendment. Mr. Norleen has moved. Is that agreed? Carried. This concludes our business of the evening. Minister Carr, do you have any final comments?
Well, I guess just briefly, I'd like to thank all of my officials for being here tonight. As much as I'd like to be able to answer every single question, I rely heavily on my officials for technical things. So thank you to all of them that are in the room and those that are in the other room waiting that didn't have an opportunity to come in. And of course, thank you to the members of the committee for being here tonight and the opposition for asking the questions. And of course, to all the support staff that make these evenings happen. So thank you very much.
Mr. Witherspoon?
Yeah, thank you to a very fine chair, really reasonable in this committee, and to committee members and to the minister for the time. And thank you to the officials from SaskPower, from TSAS, from Gov Relations, from the minister's office for their time here tonight and for bringing forward the consultations and engagement with respect to these plans.
Well, thank you. And I would actually like to thank Hansard, too, for all the work that they do, and the staff, Stacy, for helping me out, and all these things that a lot of people just take for granted. But anyway, seeing we have no further business today, I'll ask a member to move a motion for adjournment. Mr. Lean so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned to the call of the chair.